Going to kick things off with the Irish Daily Mirror here. Ram, don't ruin my Inter dream. So we did bring you this story a couple of weeks ago that Romelu Lukaku was kind of hinting that he may want out of Manchester United. It's become a little bit more than a hint here, writes Jeremy Cross. And also some beautiful food photographs from Liverpool's preparation camp in Spain, where they're picking up some lovely tasty food. Bit of Salt Bay action going on there was my main thought. That's the Irish Daily Mirror this morning.
The Irish Times leads with rugby. Nucifora sets minimum target of World Cup semi-final place, says Jerry Thornley. Salaries of Irish players to remain below minimum wage. This is for the men's international sevens team. And Matt Williams saying Leinster can look to Ali's rumble in the jungle for victory template. So the comparison here is that Glasgow are George Foreman. Not loved by everyone, but respected for the power of their attack. From the short jabs of their forward runners to destructive combinations of the interplay between forwards and backs, with the knockout right hook ability of Stuart Hogley. See what he did there? He says, before the rumble in the jungle, Ali taught the locals in Zaire to chant Ali Bomaye. During the days leading up to the fight, the locals were all chanting this, and this angered Foreman. Then the rope a dope frustrated him, and Ali, laying back on the ropes with no fear, made him mad. Great warriors like Ali are calculated, determined and coldly ruthless, just like Leinster apparently.
It was the exact theme that the Crusaders used, I think, 2 years ago. Apparently Scott Robertson has a theme every year that he uses. He introduced his squad. You can't speak about the theme until a certain time passes, so we don't know what the one last year was or this year's. But the Rumble in the Jungle was that year's. It ended up with the Super Rugby final in Johannesburg, which was obviously fitting, and it had been 9 years since the Crusaders, I think, had won the Super 14 title, and 9 years between drinks as well for Ali. So
he's got me excited for this. He's saying, I can't help but think Leo Cullen, in his own quiet way, is laying the beginnings of an audacious trap, whatever they may be. He says, this is not the Rumble in the Jungle, more the Celtic Park Shuffle.
The Irish Examiner this morning, a picture of John Egan there looking pretty happy. Journeyman arrives. He relishes continuous circuitous route, I should say, to the Premier League. This is obviously from their sunny base in Portugal as they prepare for the upcoming games. That's the front page of the Irish Examiner. Thoughts inside from Ronan O'Gara as well on Doug Howlett's Munster departure. He may be Munster's greatest signing, and he carried that aura lightly, writes Rog inside.
The Irish Daily Mail leads with still on track. Ireland primed for a World Cup semi, says David Nucifora. Collar, meanwhile, oversees cash-strapped FAI's finances. That is Joseph Collar, the finance director of UEFA, coming in to help the FAI. And the little label up at the top, Yellow Peril, the championship heat intensifies on Davy Fitz's Wexford. It's not a big weekend of hurling in an overall sense, but it is a huge, huge one for the Wexford hurlers.
The Irish Independent, meanwhile, a lovely photograph here from the Giro d'Italia yesterday, where it was a Cork man who finished third in this stage, Eddie Dunbar, and beautiful photograph there from the streets on the Giro d'Italia. San Maurizio is the name of the town. In terms of the detail on it there, Quinn takes key role in FAI talks. Dan MacDonald writes here, business group to meet Ross and Mooney. That's Shane Ross and Noel Mooney as UEFA send finance director to Dublin is another story that dominates. I'm sure there's more detail on it in some of the other papers. Ross, it says, was opposed to the FAI bringing in Noel Mooney as a stopgap option for 6 months on a secondment from UEFA. It was one line that I hadn't been aware of up to this point. But the main point being that Niall Quinn is to take a central role in Irish football's power play, and he's committed to discussions with Shane Ross and Noel Mooney. It's been something that's been mooted for quite some time. We shall see how it plays out over the next while. And Rory O'Connor writing about the semi-finals. David Nucifora, some interesting stuff to say. Semi-finals, the starting point of Ireland's World Cup ambitions.
The Herald goes with under the radar, low-key start for Dubs with a picture of Ciarán Kilkenny there. 16,000 people expected to show up in Portlaoise tomorrow. That means 6,000 tickets will go unused for the start of the Dublin team's drive for 5. You've also got that Quinn story about him playing a key role in the new FAI.
The Irish Sun, Seamus will Luca and see. Those great Luca Connell headlines just keep on coming. Owen Cowser here saying that there won't be any hard sell. Big talking point in yesterday's show about Luca Connell, whether he should be capped or not. And in, out, shake it all about is Pep plotting transfer spree, Leroy Sané and Harry Maguire among his targets, according to Mike McGrath there.
The Irish Daily Star goes with a couple of football stories. Mercenaries, says the story at the back. It's Lothar Matthäus talking about Manchester United, saying they've accused them of signing too many mercenaries, players who don't care about the club. You've got a picture here of the Liverpool team in Spain. Pork chops, sir, says the headline. You've also got an inset picture of Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, who's got his glasses set down on the bridge of his nose, making him look a little bit like Salt Bae, so I hope he followed through with the actual dash of salt on his pork chop. And fans snub Baku final. Arsenal and Chelsea are sending back a staggering 50% of their tickets for the Baku final, and the stadium could be only half full. 69,000 seats in that stadium in Baku, the Olympic Stadium. I love the way that these countries actually have an Olympic stadium, even though they're never going to. Well, okay, that's touch wood that Azerbaijan will never host the Olympics. They could well do, but like, there's mad countries that have Olympic stadiums that will never be within a prayer of hosting the Olympic Games.
You would assume that's the exact reason they've built it and named it that way.
Because they can say to the Olympic Council, we've got one. Like Cambodia have an Olympic stadium. I don't think they're going to get an Olympic Games anytime soon.
No, that they're ready to bid. It does look like Salt Bae is cooking for Liverpool.
No, Salt Bae is based in Dubai.
No, I know it's not actual Salt Bae, but...
Oh, sorry. It looks. What do you mean? It looks like Salt Bae is cooking.
You know,
for
he's
Liverpool.
the guy. This guy.
Yeah. That was just the comparison I just made about Oxlade-Chamberlain.
I mentioned it a bit earlier, but you weren't listening.
Well, I need to really tune in then.
I mean, if Owen isn't listening, we're really screwed. The Times Ireland edition, meanwhile, Kohler called in to assess FAI finances, writes John Fallon here. This is the news reported in a lot of the newspapers. Joseph Kohler is one of the leading heads at UEFA. He's the finance director, and he's coming in as a secondment on the same day that Noel Mooney will arrive on June the 3rd. He will be in situ as well, and they're going to do a bit of a review of FAI's finances. Has been discussed over the last while. 5 Irishmen make the Pro 14 Dream Team, writes Kieran O'Reilly, and a photograph of James McLean as well, as you can see there on that graphic, going through his motions in the sunshine in Portugal. And he's got the "You are now entering free Derry" as one of the most prominent tattoos on his legs. And also, I can imagine that you probably need less sun cream when you've got that many tats.
Does it actually protect you from?
It must to some degree.
God, that's a layer of science now I didn't expect to get into.
Science.
If that's a surefire way of me reducing my factor 50 usage on a yearly basis, then
you're screwed on.
I'll get tattoos everywhere. The reason why I'm not paying attention is I've got to check and double check and triple check all these stories I'm about to read out, because on the back of the Racing Post, Boris Johnson is favoured to replace Theresa May, according to the odds. And the stage is set on their main story on the back. Villa odds on to repeat Wembley heartache, says Dan Childs. The front of the Racing Post then says it's going to be a classic, previews and best bets, as the Irish Guineas meeting kicks off at the Curragh. And Hot Property, Too Darren Hot, joins Magna at head of Irish 2000 market.
The Daily Telegraph are to be commended for giving prominence to this story in the front page of the sports section today. Pure evil, and a photograph there of Bob Higgins, ex-Southampton coach, youth coach Higgins, guilty of 45 charges of indecent assault on 23 teenage boys. The newspaper reports the 9-week trial wrapped up yesterday, and it looks as though Bob Higgins is going to spend the rest of his life in jail.
And finally for me, it's The Guardian. They leave it with Arsene Wenger saying it's a bit of a nightmare. He's hit out at the Mkhitaryan no-go and Baku travel hitches.
That's the newspapers. Give you a bit of detail about what's going on inside some of them now as well. We mentioned... One story we didn't mention is in the... it is covered in a lot of the... I don't think we mentioned it, to be honest. It covered in a lot of the newspapers this morning. Murphy, Dublin will easily win historic 5th in a row. This was a headline that jumped out at me today. It was Vinnie Murphy who's been speaking to Dublin fans. I think it's a Dublin fans podcast. And at last, somebody's come out and said, of course they're going to win it. They're going to win this thing easy. Have you not seen them over the last 4 or 5 years? Vinnie Murphy has really weighed in a way that I'm sure Jim Gavin hasn't been necessarily over delighted with. He says last year they walked away with the All-Ireland. They're going to do the same this year. Once they get the mental preparation right, I think they're going to win it as easily as they won it last year. I'm just hoping they meet a Mayo or a Kerry on the way, because last year they were saying, well, they won it easy, but you didn't beat a Mayo or a Kerry. I just think beat Mayo or Kerry in the semi-final and Mayo or Kerry in the final, and we'll have the 5 in a row.
Yeah, that was on the Hill 16 podcast.
Easy as that.
I like that. I like that brash confidence.
Brash.
If you ask any Dublin fan, how would you like to win the All-Ireland? It would be beating Mayo and beating Kerry en route, because last year they knocked Tyrone off the perch in the All-Ireland final.
It
was too easy.
Even from the Super 8 stages on, it was...
But it would be kind of a full house. They could say that they beat this current iteration of Tyrone close-ish to their peak.
Yeah.
Even though that's not really saying much in terms of being a great, great, great team. But then the question around last year was, did they really come up against anybody else who could be considered as the second best team in the country? And I think Mayo would have a fairly strong claim to that position at the moment. Kerry might have a strong claim to the third best team in the country at the moment. So there'd be nothing more satisfying for for them to beat Mayo in the semi-final and Kerry in the final, I think. Do what they couldn't do in 1982.
Are you licking your Salt Bay chops at the idea that a Dubs legend has come out and said, yeah, we'll win it easy, and hopefully meet those lads on the way?
Well, I think he has to be commended for speaking what every Dublin fan is thinking. Like, Dublin fans are terrible at Yeraism. They try their best to be cute hooers. They're terrible at it. Dublin people should get used to what their whole psyche has built into be, which is cocky, which is being arrogant, which is lording it over everybody when their team is doing well. That's what Dublin fans are supposed to be. So I've got way more respect for Vinnie Murphy in this regard than if he was like, yeah, sure, we'll see how the season goes, and sure, we'll be very lucky, we'll be privileged to win 5 in a row. He should be saying, nah, we'll easily walk this, which he's kind of saying, and we're going to win again next year and the year after. Stop talking about the 5 in a row is what he's saying. Let's start talking about the 6 and 7.
I mean, it's so dangerous though, isn't it? Like, that's the inherent...
Well, he's not in the camp. He's not in the camp. He can say what he wants. He's like us watching in from the outside. It's like, we're not going to hear that from anybody in the camp, and I doubt anybody in the camp actually believes that.
Most, do you know what? It's an interesting point. It's clearly true, but most former players you talk to do adopt that sort of cautious.
Yep.
Well, you know, I think, geez, Mayo could be thereabouts. Kerry, God, looking good. Most of them adopt that approach.
And even if you talk to Stephen Doyle out in the office at any point, he's adopted that approach as well. And anybody who we've worked with who is a good Dublin GAA person will adopt that approach. But they're adopting the Kerry model for it to be a supporter of Dublin, which doesn't work like that. When you've got your population, when you've got your funding, when you've got the team that you've got and the strength and depth that you've got, you can afford to be as brash as you want. There are no pitfalls here. The team itself can carry on with this veneer of humility, which actually isn't a veneer, it's actually a true sense of humility, and they can carry on pretending that they don't think they're the best team in the country. They have that deep-rooted confidence. They don't have the arrogance that some of the other supporters have. But I'm saying, if you're a Dublin fan and you're not connected to the team, be arrogant, enjoy these moments, enjoy lording it over everybody else.
Yeah, Kildare's Stephen Doyle is backing Dublin for the 5 in a row, is what you're saying.
Well, yeah, you can take that up with him.
One of the other things we want to touch on is David Nucifora is covering a lot of the newspapers this morning, saying that the expectation for this Ireland team is that they're going to go one better than they've ever done before and reach a semi-final of a World Cup. And it is covering a lot. It is a bit of a news line. It's covering a lot of the newspapers. It actually, when you read into it, makes utter sense, and I don't think he's discussing anything that he wouldn't have sat down with. Probably had the discussion with Joe Schmidt post 2015 and set a goal for 2019, which you would think is probably, look, at the target here is to get to a semi-final. Anything after that's bonus territory. I mean, maybe even after the Six Nations, a semi-final is nearly bonus territory, but it's not. It isn't. I'm laying the gauntlet onto Joe Schmidt. We got to reach semi-final here. This is total disaster. I'm sure these are all in-house agreed targets.
Yeah, it's mad how one person's position is based on one result alone. Like David Nucifora's entire career with the IRFU is based on the quarter-final in the 2019 Rugby World Cup. That is the only thing that matters. Every single decision that David Nucifora has made that has ruffled a few feathers has come back to the idea that, well, it's all in the greater good of the Irish rugby team. It's all in the greater good of Ireland not succumbing to a similar situation that we succumbed to in 2015, which was that we didn't have enough players who were ready to step up to the big game. The Leinster fans who were pissed off about Joey Carberry moving south, it doesn't matter. The 2019 World Cup is when it pays off. The Ulster fans pissed off about Ruan Pinar leaving, doesn't matter. It's because of the 2019 World Cup. It's all going to pay off.
Yeah, and I mean they do now look like good decisions. Like given how everything is unfolding at both those provinces in those positions, they do now look like solid decisions.
Don't get me wrong, they do, but ultimately there are still fans of Leinster and Ulster who I feel at the time of those decisions will be rightly annoyed with David Nucifora for playing a part in all of this, because they are just thinking, if they just think about the fortunes of their province. Now luckily they're all Ireland fans as well, for about 99% of them, so they can see the greater good in this as well. But we knew what the quarter-final would be quite some time ago. We knew that regardless of form, regardless of what position Ireland were in or the rest of the rugby world was in, the 2019 World Cup quarter-final would be an extremely tough undertaking for Ireland, because we knew if we get out of our pool, it's going to be South Africa or it's going to be New Zealand that we beat in the quarter-final. It doesn't matter what...
We're all thinking we're going to win the pool in South Africa. It's going to be South Africa, and sure, look, like we beat New Zealand, Jesus, sure, South Africa,
that
I've taken the Vinnie Murphy approach.
Like, that attitude was there, especially when we beat them, hockeyed them really in Dublin. What was it, November 2017 at this point?
A couple of years ago.
Like, when South Africa were at a very low ebb. They've come back nicely here. We've got ahead of ourselves to a point where we think that this World Cup quarter-final is now the thing that once Ireland are in a good position for, they will win. Ireland could have the best team of all time and have the best World Cup of all time, and all the preparation is going so well. You're still coming up against the All Blacks or the Springboks. Ireland can play brilliantly and lose the game. And ultimately, this whole David Nucifora tenure is viewed as something of a failure. Because we've spoken about this so much, this has been hammered home to the nth degree.
It is only that he will sit down with Philip Brown and whoever he answers to, and will say, listen, I mean, the plan was absolutely solid from my point of view. If you look at it, those decisions we made, John Cooney became a player that nobody could have ever expected him to become. Joey Carberry, we knew the path he was on. He needed game time. I facilitated all of that. I made tough decisions. They weren't popular decisions. I put us in the best possible position. We blew it in the quarterfinals, but that ain't my fault, pal. He does get to have that conversation, and because the longer this thing goes on with Ireland at World Cup, how could it not be in people's minds is the other thing. Like, particularly when it comes to a pressure point, 60 minutes in, the game is tight. We've never made it to a semi-final. It's like there must be some sort of psychological thing there must be at some point or another that you could push it out of your mind. I'm sure they do a whole bunch of psychology work around it, but it must be a factor at some point. The longer it goes on, the bloody worse it gets.
Well, you talk about a hypothetical there. I think it's far from a hypothetical. I think 60 minutes in a World Cup quarter-final and it being tight is best case scenario, really. Like, I don't think we're going to hockey South Africa or New Zealand. Hot take there this morning, that we're not going to hockey South Africa or New Zealand.
Hot take graphic.
So I think Ireland, to win the quarter-final, will be in a position after an hour in the World Cup quarter-final where it's extremely tight. As you say, surely there has to be a factor where it's like, yeah, the weight of everything the IRFU has done over the last 4 years depends on these next 20 minutes. It has to seep in. That's up to Joe Schmidt, though, as you say rightly. That's up to the squad. That's up to everybody in the backroom team to make sure that mentality is right. And ultimately, you can look at it in isolation, and Nucifora will hold up his hands and say, yeah, I've done everything in my power to ensure it went well. Do the people who are hardcore Ulster and Leinster fans then start to think to themselves, God, I wonder, would we have had the extra bit of juice to do back-to-back European Cups? Would Ulster fans be saying to themselves, God, we might have had a bit of an extra legacy of European IRFUs around for a season? I'm kind of overstating the importance of that, because John Cooney's been brilliant, but I do wonder if the attitude will change a small bit, because so far it has worked.
Yeah, fans can be fickle. Bit of success, all makes sense, everybody's happy, until like a month later where you're like, that Joey Carberry in a red jersey still doesn't quite work for me.
I think it's perfect.
We mentioned, just to very quickly touch before Owen gives us a roundup of a few bits and pieces that are happening outside of the back pages of the newspapers this morning. We mentioned the Daily Telegraph's reporting this morning. It's the journalist Ben Rumsby writing here on the paedophile Bob Collins, who's a former Southampton and Peterborough youth coach, whose 9-week trial for various sexual assault allegations came to an end yesterday, and it looks as though he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison for a number of counts. Guilty on 45 of 51 counts that were held against him for the sexual assault of kids. Took advantage of children that were coming through football's youth system at the time. As I said, Southampton and Peterborough over a 25-year period. Described as a serial predator, and as I said, it is expected that more victims are going to come forward as well. Well done to the Telegraph for giving the story such due prominence this morning, and also well done to one of the very early victims who had come forward to bring this case to public light, who was Greg Llewellyn, who waived his right to anonymity yesterday to come out and speak about the impact that this had on him, and the hope that more people come forward as well. Ben Rumsby writes that during his trial, many of his victims described Bob Higgins as godlike, their mentor and the father figure, as well as speaking about how they feared complaining about him, and that would spell the end of their dream to become a professional footballer. It's such an important point, I think, to be taken away from this entire thing, and that's probably it, that obviously parents and kids invest so much in this thing being a success, not to lose sight of something as gruesome as this. Higgins is also accused, Llewellyn, the victim I should say, is also accused Southampton at the time of failing to do enough to protect him and other victims. He says you have to point the finger, and there was some negligence there, but there was also only one perpetrator. So all the details on that story, and there are many of them, grim in most instances in the Daily Telegraph this morning.
There's a couple of online stories we want to get to. One of them we're going to postpone for about 20 minutes or so because it's GA related, and we'll do it on the back of Enda McGinley. But just to touch on one that I don't think made the papers. The Mirror did report it last night, though, that the Cristiano Ronaldo case, the rape allegation from Catherine Mayorga in Vegas has moved on another step. Of course, the alleged incident took place 10 years ago, and we spoke about this during the Champions League before Juventus got knocked out, about where exactly this case is at. And essentially, the lawyers for Catherine Mayorga had a lot of trouble in tracking down Cristiano Ronaldo. Now, you don't actually have, like the United States, in Italy, to physically provide or produce a summons to the person or to the person you want to summon to court, essentially.
You don't have to.
You don't have to. All you need is an address, and they struggle to get that. So essentially, Mayorga's lawyers have managed to track him down. They've tracked down his home in Turin, and they've been basically hunting him since October, when the US police reopened the inquiry. So it's taken this long to actually find an address. So the lawyers for Cristiano Ronaldo are obviously trying to get the case dismissed, and they've denied that they've declined to provide its address. The documents then basically saying records go blank when they search for anything for Ronaldo. Property records have been blacked out. So that's the allegation from the Mayorga camp. But they have found his Turin address, and so what happens next basically is they get in touch with the Italian authority. So the Italy Central Authority, which it's called, is now on the case. They delivered a summons to the complaint. So ultimately, he hasn't been summoned just yet, but they've tracked him down, and the Italy department is now on it. So that's the next step on this, because this has been one of these stories where every couple of days or every couple of weeks you're like, what's actually going on here?
Right.
And essentially, a US judge is the person who's kept this alive, because I didn't actually realise this. So according to the Mirror, it says, last month, with time running out and Mayorga's legal team struggling to find someone to track down the Portugal national team captain, a US judge allowed an extra 180 days for the summons to be delivered. So if it wasn't for that US judge giving an extension on the summons, this case could have been dead in the water. But that extension was granted, the 180 days was granted, and within that window, they found Ronaldo's address, and you'd expect now the Italian authorities to follow this up. So it'll be interesting to see how this one develops. But very, very interesting. Like, there was a great ESPN piece done a couple of months ago about the problems that journalists have had in terms of even contacting lawyers stateside on behalf of Ronaldo as to what is actually going on. We've got some more clarity this morning.